Imagine a saint who could never learn the language of the people he was supposed to evangelize. A missionary who felt repulsion for the local food and constantly suffered from the cold. A man of God who spent months without feeling any spiritual consolation, only emptiness and interior darkness. You would say that this man was a failure, wouldn't you? But the Catholic Church declared him a saint. And today, almost 4 centuries after his death, thousands of people turn to him asking for intercession. How is it possible that someone so seemingly inadequate for his mission became one of North America's most powerful saints? This is the extraordinary story of Noël Chabanel, the forgotten martyr who teaches us that true holiness can flourish exactly where we least expect it. In the icy lands of New France, where winter seemed endless and the forests stretched out like a dark green sea to the horizon, there was a man who carried an invisible cross. It was not a wooden cross, stained with blood or displayed for the eyes of the world. It was an inner cross made of silence, spiritual aridity, and a fidelity that few could understand. His name was Noël Chabanel, and his story is one of the deepest and most moving among all the martyrs who shed their blood for the gospel in the frozen lands of North America. It was the 17th century, a time of great discoveries and conquests, but also of profound suffering and sacrifice. While Europe seethed with religious wars, political transformations, and the birth of a new scientific and philosophical era, across the Atlantic, in lands that Europeans called the New World, Catholic missionaries embarked on journeys that would test not only their physical endurance, but the very depth of their faith. Among them, the Jesuits stood out for their courage, dedication, and willingness to face the unknown in the name of Christ. Missionary life in New France was painted with romantic colors in the letters that reached Europe. There was talk of mass conversions, of entire tribes embracing the Catholic faith, of miracles and wonders that confirmed the divine presence in those distant lands. But the reality was infinitely more complex and painful. Missionaries faced unbearable cold, unknown diseases, constant hunger, almost insurmountable language barriers, and often the violent hostility of tribes who saw them as a threat to their own culture and way of life. Noël Chabanel was not the type of missionary one would expect to find in heroic narratives. He was not a spiritual warrior of fiery temperament. He was not a charismatic preacher capable of converting crowds with his eloquence, nor was he a mystical visionary who saw heaven open in his prayers. On the contrary, Noël was a sensitive, intellectual man, accustomed to the silent libraries and quiet classrooms of France. He was a brilliant professor, admired for his impressive intelligence and his ability to explain the most complex concepts with crystal clarity. His students adored him, his superiors respected him, and his future seemed drawn in safe and predictable lines. But God had other plans for that cultured and refined man, plans that would take him far beyond his comfort zone, that would test every fiber of his being, and that, paradoxically, would reveal a sanctity much deeper than any heroic feat could demonstrate. Because Noël Chabanel would be called to live the most difficult kind of holiness, sanctity without consolations, fidelity without emotional rewards, love that remains firm even when the heart is cold and the soul enveloped in spiritual darkness. When Noël embarked for New France in 1643, at the age of 30, he carried in his heart the sincere desire to serve God among the native peoples of America. But that journey across the Atlantic was not just a geographical trip. It was a passage to a completely different world, where everything he knew, everything that gave him security and comfort, would be stripped away from him, layer by layer, until only the bare essence of his will to serve remained. The ocean waters rocked the ship with a violence that turned the passengers' stomachs. For weeks on end, Noël knew seasickness, weakness, the fear that the next roll of the waves would be the last before the sea swallowed the vessel. But these physical trials were only the beginning. Noël Chabanel's true suffering would begin when he stepped onto solid ground and encountered a missionary reality that was far beyond any preparation or imagination. Upon arriving in New France, Noël was assigned to work among the Hurons, one of the main native tribes in the Great Lakes region. The Jesuits thrived in this work, learning the native language easily, adapting to local customs, finding joy and spiritual satisfaction in missionary life. But for Noël, every day was a battle. The Huron language seemed impossible to master. Its guttural sounds, its grammatical constructions completely different from Latin and French, its meanings that depended on cultural contexts he did not understand. All this presented itself as an insurmountable barrier. Months passed, and Noël still stumbled over the most basic words. While his Jesuit companions were already delivering eloquent sermons in Huron, Noël could barely ask for food or explain the simplest concepts of the faith. Frustration corroded him inside. He, who had been a brilliant professor, capable of teaching complex theology with elegance and precision, now found himself reduced to a mute man, unable to communicate the deepest truths of his heart. But the difficulty with the language was only one aspect of his suffering. Noël felt revulsion towards certain native foods, the taste of bear meat, the strong smell of dried fish, the strange texture of porridges made with unknown grains. All this revolted his sensitive stomach. He forced himself to eat, knowing he needed energy to survive the brutal cold of the Canadian winters, but every meal was a torment. His body rejected what his will imposed. The climate was another relentless enemy. Winters in New France were of a severity that no European could imagine without experiencing them. The cold penetrated his bones, turning his fingers into senseless pieces of wood, freezing the air in his lungs, making every breath an acute pain. Noël, accustomed to the temperate climate of France, suffered with every blast of icy wind. With every night he had to sleep in primitive cabins where the cold seeped in through every crack. Diseases also visited him frequently. Fevers, headaches, general weakness, digestive problems. His body, unaccustomed to that hostile environment, reacted with constant fragility. There were days when he could barely get up. Yet he still tried to fulfill his missionary duties, dragging himself along with silent determination. However, of all the sufferings Noël Chabanel faced, the deepest and most painful was spiritual aridity. That feeling that God was infinitely distant, that his prayers ascended to heaven like smoke dissipating in the air, finding no response. While other missionaries described mystical consolations, experiences of union with God, moments of spiritual ecstasy that sustained them amidst trials, Noël experienced only silence, a heavy, oppressive silence that made him question his own vocation, his suitability for missionary life, even the meaning of his presence in that forgotten corner of the world. It was as if all his sensitivity, all his intelligence, all his cultural refinement were not only useless, but real obstacles to his mission. He felt like a complete failure, a dead weight to his companions, a teacher who couldn't teach, a missionary who couldn't evangelize, a Jesuit who found neither joy nor consolation in his own religious calling. And it was precisely at this moment of greatest darkness, of deepest interior despair, that Noël Chabanel made the decision that would define his entire sanctity and transform him, centuries later, into a beacon of hope for all those who struggle with doubts, with spiritual dryness, with the feeling of failure and inadequacy. It was in this moment of darkness that he took his heroic vow. 1647 was the year. Noël Chabanel was now 34 years old and had already spent 4 years in the Huron mission. 4 years of constant struggle, failure after failure, nights when he considered asking to be sent back to France, where he could resume his work as a professor and live a tranquil and productive religious life. It would be a perfectly legitimate choice. No one would blame him for recognizing that he was not suited for missionary life in the extreme conditions of New France. But something inside him resisted this easy solution. It was not pride, nor stubbornness, nor even a poorly understood sense of duty. It was something deeper, more mysterious. It was an intuition that God wanted him exactly there, in that place of suffering and apparent uselessness. It was a perception that his cross, however invisible to the eyes of others, held immense value in the eyes of God. On a day in March, when snow still covered the ground, but the first distant breath of spring could be felt in the air, Noël Chabanel entered the small, rustic mission chapel. His knees touched the cold wooden floor, his eyes fixed on the simple crucifix hanging on the wall. And there, in that humble place before God and his own conscience, he made a solemn vow. He promised to remain in the Huron mission until death, even if he never experienced spiritual consolation, even if he continued to fail to learn the language, even if his soul remained enveloped in aridity and darkness. He promised that his love for God would not depend on feelings, but on concrete acts of will. He promised absolute fidelity, no matter the emotional or spiritual cost. It was a moment of pure freedom and total surrender. Noël chose love when everything inside him screamed to give up. He chose fidelity when it would have been much easier to seek his own comfort. He chose to remain on the cross when he could have legitimately come down from it. This vow transformed everything, not in the external circumstances of his life, which remained as difficult as before, but in the inner depth of his soul. From that moment on, Noël was no longer a reluctant missionary fighting his own inadequacy. He was a free man who had chosen his path with full awareness and total determination. It no longer mattered whether he was good at languages or felt spiritual consolations. What mattered was that he had said yes to God completely and irrevocably. His Jesuit companions noticed the change, not in Noël's abilities, which remained limited, but in his attitude. There was now a profound serenity in him, a peaceful acceptance of his limitations, a genuine humility that came not from defeat, but from inner freedom. He no longer pretended to be what he was not. He accepted himself as God had created him, with all his frailties and difficulties, and offered that imperfect self as a living sacrifice to divine service. Noël began to work more behind the scenes of the mission. He helped with domestic tasks, cared for the sick, prepared materials for the other missionaries. He accepted that his contribution would not be through eloquent preaching or dramatic conversions, but through humble and hidden service. And in that acceptance, paradoxically, he found a peace that had escaped him throughout those years of struggle. Days remained difficult. Nights were still cold. The Huron language remained mysterious. But now, Noël carried all this with a silent dignity that impressed those who knew him well. There was a sanctity in him that did not shine with fireworks, but burned with a constant and inextinguishable flame, fueled not by fleeting emotions, but by a fundamental choice renewed every day. While Noël quietly worked in the mission, fulfilling his vow day after day, the world around him was about to plunge into chaos. Tensions between the native tribes of the region had been growing for years, fueled by territorial disputes, competition for the European fur trade, and old rivalries dating back generations. The Iroquois, a powerful confederation of 5 native nations, viewed the alliance between the French and the Hurons with increasing hostility. For the Iroquois, this alliance represented a threat not only militarily, but also economically, as the Hurons controlled important trade routes and had privileged access to European firearms and other goods. In 1648 and 1649, this tension exploded into a series of devastating attacks. Iroquois warriors, armed and organized, launched violent campaigns against Huron villages. They were attacks of shocking brutality, executed with impressive military efficiency. The villages were surrounded at dawn, when most inhabitants were still asleep. Then the massacre began. The cries of the victims echoed through the forests. The smell of smoke from burning cabins mingled with the metallic scent of blood. Children cried desperately. Women tried to protect their children. Huron warriors fought fiercely but were outnumbered and outgunned. It was absolute chaos. The destruction of an entire way of life, the annihilation of communities that had existed there for generations. Jesuit missionaries became special targets of this violence. The Iroquois saw them as symbols of the French-Huron alliance, as representatives of a strange religion that threatened their own traditions. When they captured a Jesuit, they made a terrible example of him, subjecting him to prolonged and refined tortures, designed not only to kill, but to break the victim's spirit and terrify all those who witnessed or heard of his suffering. Father Jean de Brébeuf, one of the region's most renowned missionaries, was captured in March 1649. A man of impressive stature and remarkable physical strength, Brébeuf was respected even by the natives who opposed the Jesuit presence. But none of that saved him. For endless hours, he was subjected to unimaginable tortures. They burned his body with red-hot irons. They tore strips of his flesh. They poured boiling water over his head in a cruel parody of baptism. They cut pieces from his lips and tongue. And through it all, Brébeuf not only maintained his faith, but continued trying to preach the gospel to his torturers until death finally freed him from his suffering. Father Gabriel Lalemant, Brébeuf's companion, suffered a similar fate. A physically frailer man, Lalemant endured tortures that lasted even longer than Brébeuf's. Surviving witnesses described how he remained conscious throughout the ordeal, praying in a low voice, forgiving his executioners, offering his sufferings to God. When he finally died, his body was so mutilated it was barely recognizable as human. This news reached Noël Chabanel with devastating impact. Brébeuf and Lalemant were not just distant colleagues, they were close friends, men with whom he had shared meals, prayers, deep conversations about the meaning of their mission. And now they were dead, horribly martyred, their bodies desecrated, their lives cut short at the peak of their missionary work. Noël could have seen in these deaths a confirmation of his own fears, a legitimate reason to abandon the mission and seek safety. After all, his vow of permanence did not obligate him to actively seek martyrdom. But instead of retreating, Noël found in those events a strange and profound confirmation that he was in the right place, doing what God wanted of him. If his most talented, most successful, most capable brothers had given their lives, how could he, with all his limitations, do less? Huron villages were being systematically destroyed. Survivors fled west or sought refuge within the palisades of the Jesuit mission of Sainte Marie. The world Noël had known during his years in New France was collapsing around him. But he remained firm, fulfilling his vow, serving where needed, internally preparing himself for whatever God allowed to happen. By the end of November 1649, the situation had become untenable. The Sainte Marie mission was overcrowded with Huron refugees. Supplies were scarce. Winter was approaching with its threat of deadly cold and widespread famine. The Jesuit superiors made the difficult decision to evacuate the mission and establish a new post on an island in Lake Huron, where they hoped to be safer from Iroquois attacks. Noël Chabanel received orders to accompany a group of Christian Hurons to this new location. It was a dangerous journey through lands where Iroquois patrols might be hiding behind any tree, waiting to attack. But Noël accepted the mission without hesitation. His vow had prepared him to accept any order, any danger, any sacrifice. The group departed on a cold morning. Snow had already begun to fall, announcing the arrival of winter. The Hurons walked quickly, knowledgeable of the forest, moving with a silent efficiency that contrasted with Noël's more clumsy steps. He struggled to keep up, his body already weakened by years of deprivation and disease, his feet sinking into the fresh snow, his lungs burning with the icy air. For days, the group advanced through the forest. They slept in makeshift shelters, ate meager rations, and remained constantly alert for signs of danger. Noel prayed constantly, not with eloquent words, but with simple, repetitive prayers that came from his heart like steady beats. He thought of his martyred companions, Brebeuf and L'Allemand, and asked them to intercede for him on that uncertain journey. At some point during that journey, something happened that would never be fully clarified. The exact details remain shrouded in mystery, known only to God and those who were present. What is known is that Noel separated from the main group, accompanied by a Huron guide whom he apparently trusted. Some accounts suggest the guide offered to show a shortcut, others that Noel was deliberately deceived. What happened in the following hours is subject to speculation and historical reconstruction. What seems certain is that, at some point on that journey, on the banks of a river whose exact name has been lost to history, the Huron guide betrayed Noël Chabanel. The motives remain obscure. Perhaps resentment against the missionaries he blamed for the destruction of his people. Perhaps fear that Noel's presence would attract Iroquois attention. Perhaps simply the kind of inexplicable violence that emerges when the world is crumbling around. Noel never had a chance to defend himself. He was not a warrior. He carried no weapons. He had no combat training. When the attack came, quick and brutal, he barely had time to understand what was happening. Perhaps there was a moment, a single instant frozen in time, when Noel realized his life was ending. Perhaps he saw the blow coming and understood there was no escape. In that final moment, what went through Noël Chabanel's mind? Did he think of his distant France, of the classrooms where he had been so happy, of the students who admired him? Did he feel fear, that primordial terror that accompanies the consciousness of impending death? Or did he finally experience, after so many years of spiritual aridity, a moment of divine consolation, a sudden opening of the heavens, a certainty that he was about to enter the presence of God? No one can know. What is known is that Noël Chabanel died there, on the banks of that nameless river, on a cold afternoon in December 1649. He died alone, with no witnesses who could record his last words, no companions who could comfort him in his final moments. He died as he had lived his mission, in silence, in obscurity, far from the spotlight of human glory. His body was thrown into the river. The icy waters carried him away, far away, to some unknown place where he would never be found. There was no solemn funeral, no marked grave, no monument to indicate where his remains rested. Noël Chabanel simply vanished, as if the earth had swallowed him. When news of his death reached the surviving Jesuits, there was mourning and prayer, but also a profound understanding that Noel had fulfilled his vow fully and completely. He had promised to remain in the mission until death, even without consolations. And so he had done. He had remained faithful until the end, not out of external obligation, but out of an inner choice, renewed every day of his missionary life. The years passed. The Jesuit mission in New France faced more trials, more martyrdoms, more challenges. Eventually, the situation stabilized, new missionaries arrived, new strategies were developed. But among the Jesuits, the memory of Noël Chabanel did not fade. On the contrary, it began to grow slowly but steadily, like a plant sprouting in fertile soil. Initially, Noel was remembered mainly by those who had known him personally. His Jesuit companions spoke of him with a mixture of admiration and tenderness. They told stories of his struggle with the Huron language, his sensitivity to food and climate, his spiritual aridity, but they told these stories not as examples of weakness, but as testimonies of extraordinary inner strength that had allowed Noel to continue serving despite all these difficulties. These Jesuits began to notice something curious. When they faced their own trials, when they struggled with vocational doubts, when they felt the temptation to give up in the face of difficulties, Noel's memory strengthened them. They thought of that sensitive man who had remained faithful even without experiencing consolations, and this gave them courage to continue. They began to ask for his intercession in their prayers, to invoke his spiritual help when they felt weak and tempted to abandon their posts. And then came the reports of graces received. A young Jesuit who struggled with thoughts of leaving the religious order prayed to Noël Chabanel and felt a sudden peace invade his heart, a certainty that he should persevere. A missionary facing native hostility asked for Noel's help and narrowly escaped an ambush, guided by a sudden intuition to change his route. A converted Huron woman, tormented by doubts about her new faith, visited the approximate spot where Noel had died and experienced a profound spiritual consolation that dispelled all her uncertainties. These accounts multiplied over the decades. Each generation of missionaries added its own stories of miraculous intervention attributed to Noel. There were cases of protection during dangerous journeys, unexpected cures from diseases, sudden resolutions to seemingly insoluble problems. There was always a common pattern. The people who turned to Noel were those who struggled internally, who faced doubts, who carried invisible crosses similar to those he had carried in life. A particularly notable case involved an 18th century missionary named Pierre Bonnequin. Pierre was about to leave missionary life, convinced he lacked the necessary talents to evangelize the natives. Feeling like a failure, he planned to request a transfer to more academic work in Europe. But before making that final decision, something compelled him to pray to Noël Chabanel, whose name he had heard from older Jesuits. That night, Pierre had a vivid dream. He saw Noel walking through the snowy forest, alone, battling the icy wind. But on his face, there was no despair, only serene determination. When Pierre awoke, he felt an inexplicable transformation. The certainty of his failure had disappeared, replaced by a peaceful acceptance of his limitations and a renewed willingness to serve wherever God placed him. Pierre remained in the mission for 30 more years, becoming known not for great conversions, but for his humble and constant service to the natives. Cases of physical healing were also recorded. In 1752, a French girl living in Quebec suffered from recurrent fevers that no doctor could cure. Her mother, a devout woman who knew the history of the Jesuit martyrs, began a novena to Noël Chabanel. On the last day of the novena, the girl's fever suddenly broke. She woke up healthy and the disease never recurred. The doctor who attended her could not explain the sudden cure, attributing it to a miracle. Another case involved a fur trader who got lost during a snowstorm in 1783. He had already given up finding his way back and was preparing to die of cold when he vaguely remembered hearing about Noël Chabanel in a church he had visited. Desperate, he prayed for help. Minutes later, he saw a distant figure through the snow that seemed to wave to him. He followed the direction of the figure and found a natural rock shelter where he managed to protect himself until the storm passed. When the snow cleared, he was only a few hours' walk from a trading post. He swore that the figure who had guided him was a man dressed in dark clothes, similar to those of a Jesuit. As decades turned into centuries, the historical memory of Noël Chabanel began to intertwine with pious legends transmitted orally among the converted Hurons and their descendants. These legends, although not verifiable historical facts, reveal something important about the spiritual impact Noel had on those who knew his story. The most widespread legend said that on nights of dense fog, when visibility was almost zero and the forest became a dangerous labyrinth, hunters and travelers sometimes saw a silent figure dressed in black. The figure never spoke, but walked ahead of the lost travelers, guiding them along safe paths until they reached a familiar place. Then, as silently as he had appeared, the figure disappeared into the fog. Huron elders said it was Noël Chabanel continuing his mission to serve, now no longer limited by language barriers or the weaknesses of the flesh. They said he had completely forgiven the one who betrayed and murdered him, and that he now walked the forests as a spiritual guardian, protecting all those who needed help. There was also the legend of the forest whisper. It was said that in the places where the old Jesuit mission had existed, especially in the early hours of the morning or the late hours of the afternoon, when the sun was low and the shadows were long, a soft murmur could sometimes be heard. They were not clear words, but a rhythmic sound resembling prayers whispered in a low voice. Those who heard this murmur felt a deep peace invade their hearts. Whatever anguish they carried, whatever fear or worry afflicted them, that mysterious sound brought consolation. They said it was Noël praying, fulfilling in eternity the same silent fidelity he had shown in life, perpetually interceding for all those who struggled with inner trials. A third, lesser-known but equally touching legend spoke of a soft light sometimes seen near the river where Noël had died. It was not a bright or spectacular light, but a faint, almost imperceptible glow that seemed to dance on the water's surface. Those who saw this light felt compelled to stop and pray. And during that prayer, they often experienced a sudden clarity about difficult decisions they faced or found, renewed strength to continue in seemingly impossible situations. These legends circulated mainly among the converted native communities, passing from generation to generation as part of their oral tradition. They were stories told around the fire during long winter nights, stories that blended historical memory with devout imagination, creating a portrait of Noël Chabanel not only as a man who had lived and died, but as a continuous spiritual presence that remained active in the world. The Jesuits, with their characteristic intellectual rigor, were cautious about these legends. They did not officially promote them, nor did they include them in their formal historical records. But neither did they suppress or ridicule them. They recognized that these stories, even if not literally true, expressed profound spiritual truths about Noël's legacy and the impact his life and death had had on those who knew his history. During the 18th and 19th centuries, the cause of the Jesuit martyrs of Canada advanced slowly through the intricate processes of the Catholic Church. Noël Chabanel was included in this group, recognized as someone who had given his life in a missionary context, although the exact circumstances of his death were less dramatic and public than those of companions like Brébeuf and L'Allemand. The process of canonization in the Catholic Church is deliberately rigorous and meticulous. It requires not only evidence of heroic virtue in life, but also proof of miracles performed after death through the intercession of the candidate for sainthood. In the case of Noël and his companion Martyrs, the process was even more complex because it involved events that occurred centuries before in circumstances that had not been carefully documented at the time. Testimonies had to be collected, ancient accounts examined, legends separated from verifiable facts. Ecclesiastical investigators traveled through New France, now transformed into modern Canada, interviewing descendants of those who had known the martyrs, examining Jesuit records preserved in archives, visiting the sites where the historical events had occurred. What emerged from this process was a clear image of Noël Chabanel as someone whose sanctity was not based on spectacular feats, but on hidden fidelity. There were no mystical visions to report, no mass conversions credited to him, no dramatic physical miracles performed during his life. But there was something perhaps even more impressive, the consistent testimony of an unwavering fidelity maintained amidst the deepest spiritual aridity, a heroic perseverance when it would have been much easier to give up. Theologians who examined his life recognized in it a type of sanctity particularly necessary for the modern world. In an age when more and more people struggled with doubts, with feelings of inadequacy, With the absence of consoling spiritual experiences, Noel offered an alternative model of Christian life. He showed that sanctity did not depend on intense religious feelings or extraordinary talents, but on a fundamental choice to remain faithful to God regardless of emotional or practical circumstances. In 1925, Pope Pius V beatified Noël Chabanel, along with his companion, Martyrs of Canada. The ceremony at St. Peter's Basilica in Rome was a grand event, with representatives of the Canadian Church present in large numbers. But there was a particularly touching moment during the celebrations, when a Canadian bishop, in his sermon, spoke specifically about Noel. He told the story of the vow of perseverance, the struggle with the Huron language, the spiritual aridity, and then he said something that resonated deeply with many of those present. Noël Chabanel is the saint of those who struggle in silence, who carry crosses that no one else can see, who remain faithful when heaven seems closed and God seems distant. He teaches us that true love is not a feeling, but a choice, renewed day after day, to serve God regardless of the emotional cost. 5 years later, in 1930, came the official canonization. Pope Pius V declared Noël Chabanel and his companion martyrs saints of the Universal Church. It was a formal recognition of what many had already experienced in their own lives, that Noël was a powerful intercessor, particularly for those facing inner struggles and hidden trials. News of the canonization spread quickly throughout Canada and beyond. Churches dedicated to the Jesuit martyrs were built or renamed. New devotions arose. But perhaps the most profound impact of the canonization was psychological and spiritual. For countless people who struggled with vocational doubts, spiritual aridity, and feelings of failure in their religious lives, Noel's canonization offered powerful validation. Here was someone who had experienced exactly the same struggles, who had felt the same temptations to give up, who had carried the same invisible crosses. And the Church, in its wisdom accumulated over centuries, had recognized that struggle, that silent fidelity, that perseverance without consolations, was true holiness. It was not necessary to have mystical visions or perform spectacular miracles. It was enough to remain faithful day after day, even when the heart was cold and the soul enveloped in darkness. Decades after the canonization, the legacy of Saint Noël Chabanel continued to grow and deepen. His story resonated particularly strongly in certain contexts and with certain groups of people who found in it a mirror of their own experiences. Modern missionaries who faced cultures difficult to penetrate, languages impossible to master, feelings of inadequacy and failure found in Noel a special patron. They knew he understood their struggles viscerally because he had lived through exactly the same difficulties. When they felt tempted to give up, they remembered Noel's vow and found strength to continue one more day, one more week, one more month. People in vocational crises also discovered in Noel a powerful ally. Religious men and women who questioned their life choices, who struggled with doubts about whether they had followed the right path, who felt inadequate for their vocations, prayed to Noel and often experienced a renewed clarity and a profound peace about remaining where they were. Particularly touching was the number of people struggling with depression, anxiety, and other forms of psychological suffering who found comfort in Noel's story. His spiritual aridity resonated with the feeling of emotional emptiness that many experienced. His ability to continue serving even without feeling joy or satisfaction offered a model of how to live through psychological darkness without giving up on life or faith. Spiritual retreat centers began offering programs based on Noël Chabanel's spirituality. These retreats did not promise elevated mystical experiences or intense emotional consolations. Instead, they offered a space for people to explore their own spiritual aridity. their doubts, their feelings of inadequacy, using Noel's life as a beacon, showing that it was possible to live a holy life even through these experiences. A particularly interesting aspect of Noel's legacy was how he transcended denominational boundaries. Although canonized by the Catholic Church, his story touched Protestants, Anglicans, and members of other Christian traditions who recognized something universally human in him: the struggle with spiritual dryness, with feelings of inadequacy, with the temptation to give up in the face of difficulties. These were experiences that crossed all denominational lines. Writers and theologians began to explore Noel's life in depth, producing biographies, theological studies, and spiritual reflections. Some emphasized the aspect of his vow of perseverance, seeing in him a model of radical commitment that challenged the contemporary mentality of immediate gratification and easy abandonment of difficult commitments. Others focused on the aspect of his acceptance of personal limitations. In a culture obsessed with success, achievement, and constant self-improvement, Noel offered a radical counterpoint. He showed that it was possible to be holy even while limited, even while failing according to worldly standards of success, even while never overcoming certain fundamental weaknesses. In Canada, particularly in the regions where the ancient Jesuit missions had existed, a rich tradition of pilgrimage developed to the sites associated with Noel and his companion martyrs. Shrines were built, pilgrimage trails established, and visitation centers created. Thousands of people annually make these pilgrimages, many seeking Noel's specific intercession for their own spiritual struggles. A particularly touching tradition emerged among those who made these pilgrimages. Upon arriving at the places associated with Noel, pilgrims often wrote down their own struggles, doubts, and difficulties on small pieces of paper. Then, in a symbolic gesture of entrusting their trials to Noel's care, they left these papers in a special box at the shrine. Periodically, the papers were burned in a solemn ceremony, symbolizing the transformation of human struggles through divine intercession. Reading these papers was a deeply moving experience. There were mothers worried about children who had abandoned the faith. There were young people struggling with vocational doubts. There were middle-aged people questioning the meaning of their lives. There were elderly people facing loneliness and the fear of death. There were religious men and priests going through crises of faith. And in all these pieces of paper, there was a common theme: the feeling of fighting alone, of carrying an invisible cross, of needing to continue despite the absence of consolation or encouragement. And Noël Chabanel, the saint who had lived and died with exactly these same struggles, had become the special patron of all of them. What makes Saint Noël Chabanel so unique in the calendar of saints of the Catholic Church? Certainly, it is not the lack of saints who faced physical suffering, for the history of Christianity is filled with martyrs who endured unimaginable tortures. It is not the lack of saints who served in difficult missions, for there are countless examples of missionaries who worked in extreme conditions. What makes Noel singular is precisely his ordinariness, elevated to sanctity through extraordinary fidelity. He did not have visions like Teresa of Avila. He did not found a religious order like Francis of Assisi. He did not perform spectacular miracles like Anthony of Padua. He did not have the evangelizing charisma of Francis Xavier. He did not write profound theological works like Thomas Aquinas. What Noel did was something seemingly much simpler, but infinitely more difficult for many people. He remained faithful when everything inside him screamed to give up. He continued serving when he felt neither joy nor satisfaction. He persevered when God seemed silent and distant. He accepted his limitations without using that as an excuse to abandon his calling. In a profound sense, Noel challenges our conventional notions of sanctity. We are accustomed to thinking of saints as extraordinary people who transcended normal human limitations, but Noel never transcended his limitations. He remained limited until the end, struggling with the Huron language, suffering with the food and climate, experiencing spiritual aridity. And it was precisely amidst these unovercome limitations that he became a saint. This has profound implications for how we understand the Christian life. It suggests that sanctity is not necessarily in overcoming our weaknesses, but in remaining faithful despite them. It is not in reaching some state of emotional or spiritual perfection, but in choosing love and service even when we feel nothing but emptiness and difficulty. Noel also challenges our notions about the value of invisible suffering. We live in a culture that values visible and measurable achievements. We want results that can be counted, successes that can be celebrated, contributions that can be recognized. But Noel's greatest contribution to the kingdom of God was completely invisible to human eyes. It was his inner struggle, his daily choice to remain faithful, his vow kept in secret between him and God. How many people in the world today carry similar crosses? How many struggle with invisible mental illnesses, with deep spiritual doubts, with feelings of inadequacy and failure? How many remain at their posts day after day, fulfilling their obligations, serving others, without ever experiencing the consolations or satisfactions they imagine other people feel? For all these people, Noël Chabanel is more than a distant saint to be admired. He is a companion on the journey, someone who viscerally understands their struggles because he lived them in his own flesh. He is a living testimony that their invisible struggles have infinite value in the eyes of God. He is an assurance that it is possible to be holy even while struggling, even while carrying crosses that no one else can see. If it were possible to condense the legacy of Saint Noël Chabanel into a single message, what would it be? Perhaps it is this: true love is not a feeling, but a choice renewed day after day, regardless of the emotional cost or external circumstances. Noel loved God without feeling the consolations of that love. He served the Hurons without experiencing the joy that other missionaries felt in their work. He remained faithful to his vocation without having the emotional confirmation that he was in the right place. And it was precisely this disinterested love, this service without emotional reward, this fidelity without consolation that transformed him into a saint. In an era when we are constantly encouraged to follow our hearts, to do what makes us happy, to seek our authentic truth, Noel offers a radically different path. He suggests that sometimes the right path is the one that makes us unhappy. That true authenticity may involve staying in places where we don't feel authentic. That following God can mean going against all our natural feelings and inclinations. This is not masochism or self-flagellation. It is not a glorification of suffering for suffering's sake. It is, instead, a profound recognition that feelings are unreliable guides to the deeper reality. Noel felt inadequate, but he was not inadequate in God's eyes. He felt he was failing, but he was in fact perfectly fulfilling the divine plan for his life. He felt God was distant, but he was in reality closer to God than ever. This dissonance between feeling and reality is a central experience in spiritual life, but it is rarely acknowledged or discussed. Noel makes this experience visible and validated. He tells us that it is possible to be doing exactly what God wants, while feeling completely lost and inadequate. That it is possible to be on the right path, while having the absolute feeling of being on the wrong path. For those struggling with depression, anxiety, or other forms of psychological suffering, this message is particularly important. These conditions often create a profound dissonance between objective reality and subjective experience. A person may be doing good work, but feel they are failing completely. They may be surrounded by people who love them, but feel deeply alone. They may be living a valuable and meaningful life, but experience only emptiness and lack of meaning. Noël shows that it is possible to live through this dissonance without giving up on life or faith. He shows that feelings, however intense and convincing they may be, are not necessarily reliable guides to the truth. And he shows that it is possible to choose the right path even when all our feelings pull us in the opposite direction. Saint Noël Chabanel is often called the forgotten martyr of North America. And in a superficial sense, this is true. He is not as well known as some of his companion martyrs, such as Jean de Brébeuf. His story is not told as often. His name does not appear as prominently in church history books. But in a deeper sense, Noël was never truly forgotten. Throughout the centuries, his memory has been preserved and cultivated precisely by those who need him most, those who struggle in silence, those who carry invisible crosses, those who remain faithful even when heaven seems closed and God seems distant. These people have not forgotten Noël because they find in him something they do not find in more spectacular saints. They find a companion who understands their struggles, an intercessor who knows their pains, a model that shows it is possible to be holy even through aridity, doubt, and apparent failure. The life of Noël Chabanel is a story of heroic fidelity hidden beneath the cloak of ordinariness. It is a story of love that remained constant even when feelings disappeared. It is a story of obedience that persevered even when everything seemed to indicate it would be better to give up. It is a story of martyrdom, not only physical, but also spiritual and psychological, and it is, in the end, a story of hope. Because if Noël could remain faithful through everything he faced, if he could be holy even while struggling with all those difficulties, then there is hope for all of us. There is hope for those who struggle with languages they cannot learn, with environments they cannot tolerate, with jobs they cannot master. There is hope for those who pray and feel nothing, who serve and experience no satisfaction, who remain faithful and receive no confirmation. Noël teaches us that sanctity is not in great deeds or elevated mystical experiences. It is in the humble daily choice to remain where God has placed us, to do what God asks of us, to love even when we feel nothing but emptiness. It is in the fidelity that perseveres, not because it is easy or gratifying, but simply because it is the right path. And so, while his body disappeared into the icy waters of that nameless river, while his grave remains unknown and unmarked, Saint Noël Chabanel lives. He lives in the memory of the Church. He lives in the prayers of those who seek his intercession. He lives in the stories told about him. He lives in the example that continues to inspire and strengthen countless people facing their own invisible struggles. The forgotten martyr who was never truly forgotten. The failure who achieved sanctity through his failure. The silent man whose message continues to resonate through the centuries. This is Saint Noël Chabanel, patron of all those who struggle in silence, who carry invisible crosses, who remain faithful until the end, even without seeing, without feeling, without fully understanding, but always trusting that God sees, that God understands, that God values every heroic choice made amidst darkness and doubt. His life reminds us that the true measure of sanctity is not in what we achieve or what we feel, but in what we choose, day after day, renewing our yes to God regardless of circumstances. And in this simple, yet profoundly heroic choice, Noël Chabanel found not only his own path to holiness, but also offered a path for all of us who struggle to remain faithful amidst our own darkness and difficulties. May his memory continue to inspire, his intercession continue to strengthen, and his example continue to illuminate the way for all those who, like him, choose to love with deeds and not with feelings, choose to stay when it would be easier to leave, choose fidelity when the heart is cold and the soul enveloped in silence. Prayer, O Saint Noël Chabanel, silent martyr of New France, you who knew spiritual aridity and remained faithful even when heaven seemed closed and God seemed distant, intercede for me in this moment of my life. You who struggled with doubts, with feelings of inadequacy, and with the temptation to give up in the face of difficulties, understand the invisible struggles I carry in my heart. Teach me to love with deeds and not just with feelings, to remain faithful even when I experience no consolations, to continue serving even when I feel useless and failed. You who made a heroic vow to remain where God placed you until death, even without receiving emotional rewards, help me to renew day after day my choice to follow Christ, regardless of the cost or the circumstances. Saint Noel, patron of those who struggle in silence and carry invisible crosses, present my supplications to God, especially this intention I carry in my heart. Make your request. Obtain for me the grace to persevere with fidelity until the end, trusting that God sees, understands, and values every small act of love made amidst darkness and doubt. May I, like you, discover that true holiness is not in great deeds or mystical experiences, but in the humble and daily choice to remain faithful to God's call. Amen. My prayer. O Lord our God, in elevated gratitude, we lift our hearts to thank you for the gift of life and the privilege of carrying forward your love through the stories that inspire and transform us. We thank you, Father, for granting us the strength, wisdom, and courage to share the teachings of your gospel through this channel, which has been a beacon of hope and light amidst the adversities of the world. Lord, we recognize that every life is a precious gift, and we are grateful for every moment granted to us to witness and propagate your word. May every story told, every message of faith, and every divine teaching reach hearts thirsty for love, truth, and reconciliation. We thank you for the inspiration that guides us, for the blessings that multiply, and for the opportunity to contribute to the dissemination of Christianity, bringing the light of your love to those who seek direction and comfort. Through these narratives, may we touch lives, strengthen faith, and create a community united in the search for the peace and truth that only you can offer. May your grace continue to enlighten us, and may we be instruments of your mercy and compassion, reflecting the beauty of your love in every word and gesture. In the name of Jesus, our Savior, we thank you for allowing us to participate in this sacred mission. Amen. And so ends the story of Saint Noël Chabanel, the forgotten martyr who was never truly forgotten. A man who teaches us that sanctity does not always shine with spectacular lights, but sometimes burns silently in the hearts of those who choose to remain faithful, even when everything seems impossible. How many people today walk the streets, work their jobs, live their seemingly ordinary lives, carrying in their hearts the same struggles that Noel carried? How many feel inadequate for what God has asked of them? How many struggle with languages they cannot learn, with environments they cannot tolerate, with jobs that seem beyond their capabilities? How many pray and feel only silence, serve and experience no satisfaction, remain faithful and receive no emotional confirmation that they are on the right path? To all these tired hearts, to all these souls who struggle in silence, Saint Noël Chabanel extends his hand across the centuries, saying that they are not alone, that their struggles have infinite value, that it is possible to be holy exactly where they are, with all their limitations and difficulties. Noel's story confronts us with a profound and often uncomfortable truth. True love does not depend on feelings. We live in an age obsessed with emotions, where we are constantly encouraged to do what makes us happy, to follow our hearts, to seek our authentic truth. But Noel shows us a radically different path. He teaches us that sometimes the right path is the one that does not bring immediate happiness, that true authenticity may involve staying in places where we do not feel comfortable, that following God can mean going against all our natural feelings and inclinations. This is not masochism, It is not a glorification of suffering. It is instead a profound recognition that feelings, however intense they may be, are not always reliable guides to the truth. Noel felt inadequate, but he was not inadequate in God's eyes. He felt he was failing, but he was perfectly fulfilling the divine plan for his life. He felt God was distant, but he was, in reality, closer to God's heart than he had ever been. His heroic vow to remain in the mission until death, even without experiencing consolations, is one of the most courageous acts ever recorded in the history of Christian spirituality. Because it is relatively easy to remain faithful when we feel God's presence, when we experience joy in service, when we see visible fruits of our labor. But to remain faithful in aridity, in silence, in apparent failure, that requires a supernatural strength of will that can only come from divine grace. And that is exactly why Noel remains so relevant today. In an age when so many people struggle with depression, anxiety, existential doubts, and a feeling of meaninglessness, Noel offers not only comfort, but a concrete path to traverse this darkness without giving up. He shows that it is possible to live through the dissonance between what we feel and what is true, that it is possible to choose the right path, even when all our feelings pull us in the opposite direction. The pious legends that arose about him, the figure dressed in black guiding lost travelers in the fog, the gentle murmur of prayers in the places of the ancient mission, the faint light dancing over the river waters, all these stories express a profound spiritual truth. Noel continues his mission. He continues serving, continues guiding, continues interceding for all those who, like him, struggle with invisible crosses. His body was never found. There is no grave to visit, no relics to venerate. And perhaps that is perfectly appropriate, because Noel is not a saint of fixed places or tangible objects. He is a saint of the human heart, of inner struggles, of battles that no one else can see. He lives wherever someone is struggling to remain faithful, wherever someone is carrying an invisible cross, wherever someone is choosing love, even when they feel nothing but emptiness. Noel's canonization in 1930 was a formal recognition of what many already knew by experience, that sanctity is not the privilege of extraordinary people who transcend human limitations, but is accessible to all those who, despite all their weaknesses and limitations, choose to remain faithful to God's call. This is the eternal message of Saint Noël Chabanel. You do not need to be perfect to be holy. You do not need to have mystical visions or perform spectacular miracles. You do not need to overcome all your weaknesses or resolve all your doubts. You only need to remain faithful day after day, renewing your choice to love God and serve your neighbor regardless of how you feel. If this story has touched your heart, if you identified with Noel's struggles, if you also carry invisible crosses and fight silent battles, subscribe to the Sacred Stories channel. Here you will find more stories of saints who, like Noel, show us that sanctity is possible even amidst the imperfections and difficulties of human life. Share this video with someone you know who is struggling, who is thinking of giving up, who needs to know they are not alone. Leave your like so that more people can discover the inspiring story of this forgotten martyr who was never truly forgotten. And now a question for reflection. Have you ever felt that God was silent in your life? How did you deal with that spiritual aridity? Share your experience in the comments. Your story may be exactly what someone else needs to hear today to find strength to continue. And before you go, be sure to watch one of the videos that appears above, chosen especially for you, because every saint has a unique message for our hearts, and perhaps the next story is exactly the one you need to hear at this moment in your life. May Saint Noël Chabanel intercede for all of us, guiding us through our own forests of doubt and aridity until we reach the eternal presence of God. Until the next video,